Say that our castaway this week is Her Royal Highness Princess Michael of Kent. We're very glad to welcome you to our island, ma'am. Could you endure loneliness?
Yes, I think without any trouble at all. I don't think I get lonely. I've spent a lot of time on my own in Africa, and I like to be alone. I like my own company, provided I have a cat or two around.
Well, cats we'll refer to later. Let's leave them out for the moment. How much does music mean to you?
Well, a very great deal at certain times of the day. I like silence. I like to be quiet at some times. In Africa, particularly, I learnt that I could only have music in the evenings because that was the only time I could get the battery out of the lorry, so that I could play my music then. So during the day I was totally in peace and quiet with sort of animal noises, bird song.
Right. Now that is playing recorded music. Do you make music? Have you studied it? Do you play an instrument?
Yes, I do, actually. I play the guitar. Well, I've studied the classical guitar many years ago. I have a younger brother who's a hornist, plays the horn, and an older brother who wished that he'd been a pianist, but he's a scientist instead. And I don't play enough, really, anymore, because it takes time and practice to play as well as you would like to play.
But when you were young, there was family music, the best kind of music.
Always terrible arguments between my mother and my brother about the speed of some movement of some concerto. Terrible mathematical arguments about music. I'm emotional about music. I'm passionate about music, not mathematical about it.
You have this meagre ration of 8 discs. Did you find it very hard to choose? These are the 8 that may have to last a long, long time.
Pessimist. Yes, of course, everyone finds it very hard to choose 8 discs, but you originally asked me about 4 years ago to do this show, and at the time it was thought, perhaps as no one had done it in the family, that it mightn't be quite the moment. And so ever since then I've been making lists. And on the whole they've remained the same.
Right. What's the first one on the list?
It's Dvorak's Cello Concerto and the entry of the cello, because I'm born in Bohemia, and Dvorak, of course, is a Czech. And every person from my part of the world is full of Weltschmerz, and when I'm really, really depressed, I play this because it takes me as deeply and makes me as depressed as I possibly can, and then I can only go up, I feel, after this. And it reminds me of my grandmother, who was my model in all things, and a very beautiful and grand princess. And whenever life is tough and the going is difficult, I think of her, and so Dvorak will remind me of her.
Rostropovich with the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra, conducted by Herbert von Karajan. Now, you began life as Marie Christine von Reibnitz, and you were born, as you said, in Czechoslovakia. Your father, Baron von Reibnitz, where was he from?
He's from Silesia, and he was so old that, as far as he was concerned, he was from a previous incarnation when Silesia was still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire.
Yes.
In fact, it's now Poland, and these borders change rather rapidly, so one has to try to keep up with that. But my father wasn't around a terribly long time, and I was totally brought up by my mother's family.
Now, is she a Hungarian countess?
Yes.
How many children were there?
My older brother, 1.5 years older than myself, and much, much later, when my mother remarried, I have a younger brother whose father's Polish, who's sort of 12 years younger than I am, who's a hornist.
Now, sadly, when your parents split up, you stayed with your mother. She went to Australia. Why Australia?
Well, my mother was not only a historian by training, but she was also a great skier, and she skied in the 36 Olympics. And at that time, the only other people who seemed to be skiing were the British. So she had a lot of English friends who said after the war, you know, Austria's such a mess, why don't you come out to Australia and bring your 2 small children for a few years till Europe settles down a little bit. And she thought this was a good idea, and they assured her there was very good skiing in Australia, and so that's where we went.
At that time, as a small child, could you understand English?
Yes, because I had an English governess, but I was a little bit, the wall is white, the grass is green. I was trying.
Whereabouts in Australia did you settle?
We went to Sydney.
And you went to school there?
I went to school there with the Sacré-Cœur, and beautiful, beautiful city, Sydney. And I hadn't been there for some 20 years when my husband and I went there 2 years ago, and it had changed so that I didn't recognize it at all.
What were you best at school?
I think English literature and history, really. I always wanted to do everything that I did as well as I possibly can. That's very Capricorn, I suppose. So that I didn't have any particular ambition. I just wanted to do everything well. I think I wanted to be a historian like my mother from the beginning.
When you left school, you left for Europe. That was to stay with your father?
No, my father had a farm in Africa, and I went to Africa. I was a little bit too young for university, and I thought, well, it's time to go and meet the father, who I hadn't met before. So that was a terrible shock in itself, to meet a very much older person who could have been my grandfather. But it was also an introduction to Africa, and Africa became a great love of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And loved going on safari, hated killing the animals, never shot at them at all, but did everything I could, like playing very loud music to stop them being shot at. But I loved being in the jungle in Africa.
And from Africa you went to
Back
Austria?
to Austria, yes. Back to visit all the relatives and to meet all the cousins about whom I knew every little detail, because that was the role of every Central European, to know everything about one another's relatives, unlike here, where you don't even know your first cousin sometimes.
This is sadly true.
And we know our fourth cousins very, very well indeed. And many of them had, like I had, been brought up elsewhere, and we came back from our various countries of temporary exile to meet one another and hopefully marry and settle down in Austria. And so we exchanged many stories and exchanged languages, and I discovered after a little while that this was not what I wanted, to settle in Austria, but to learn instead interior design.
Yes.
And so I came to England for that reason, because there wasn't such a study in Austria at the time. It was thought that if your house had been good enough for your grandmother to live in, then it was good enough for you to live in. Why should you wish to do anything quite so nouveau riche as to do it up in a new modern way? And my mama had great English friends from her skiing days, and one of them was a very excellent interior designer who decided to, out of her great generosity, take me on as an apprentice.
So we've got you to England. This seems the point where we should have your second record.
Well, perhaps my second record, in honor of my mama, not that she needs to be remembered, but a Czardas from Fledermaus, because it'll be representative of the passion in my life, tempered, of course, by the sense of the Capricorn.
Sung by Anneliese Rothenberger. So you came to London to study interior design. You studied for a while at the Victoria and Albert Museum.
That was a little bit later. First of all, I was apprenticed, interior decorated, and I learned everything that an interior designer should know in order to correct her workmen and her builders. So I did a bit of carpentry. I certainly know how to mix paints and how to paint and so on and so forth before I started at the Victoria and Albert.
At one point you had a spell in an advertising agency. Was that in the studio?
No, this was really a very brief spell, because I felt that at this point that I wanted to know how to run my own business. And by this time I felt I'd done enough apprenticeship, and that in order to run my own business I had to know something about how an office worked. And so I went to work in an office to learn how an office worked. I'm afraid I was not at all gifted, but I learned enough to know how to tell others to work for me. I think that's what it's all about.
So then you set up your own firm.
I did.
And did the commissions come in?
Yes, thick and fast.
They did?
I did very well. I made lots of money. I was very successful.
Let's have your third record.
My third record is the beginning of Undermilk Wood. And Undermilk Wood was given to me when I was quite young in Sydney. And I didn't understand, I didn't even know where Wales was, let alone anything about Dylan Thomas. But it taught me the beginnings of my love of English literature. And I think if we have the beginning, it'll set me off, because I think I know the rest by heart.
It is spring, moonless night in the smoke.
And by the author Dylan Thomas.
There's a lovely character in Undermilk Wood called Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard, and she's incredibly tidy and clean. And she really is unbearably untidy and clean, and I terrorise my husband when he comes in sometimes from shooting and there's awful dead birds all over the hall. And he calls me Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. And then he sort of says in an awful sarcastic voice, quotes from it, and before you let the sun in, mind he wipes his feet.
Now, while you were working in London, you married an English businessman, but it didn't work out and the marriage was annulled. But this led to problems later, when you and Prince Michael of Kent fell in love and wanted to marry. You were a Roman Catholic and a divorcee, and a church wedding at that time wasn't possible.
Well, we thought it would be possible. It certainly would have been possible in the Catholic Church, because after all, my first marriage had been annulled by Pope Paul VI. The problem arose in that Prince Michael could not have Catholic children.
Mm-hmm.
This was, in fact, after the Second Vatican Council, no longer a great obstacle, but there were problems of communication between the English Catholic Church, and it was going to take a little bit longer than the 1 month of engagement that we allowed ourselves to
Yes.
explain this to the English Catholics, who were up in arms thinking that because our children could be Anglican, why was it that they felt they had been under some pressure to have Catholic children? In fact, this situation has never changed. Our marriage was convalidated recently, as you know, and our children are very much remaining Anglican, and I very much wish to remain and shall remain a Catholic.
You and Prince Michael attend both Anglican and Roman Catholic services.
On alternate Sundays. And he comes with me, and I go with him.
Yeah.
We're very ecumenical.
Well, that sounds a splendid arrangement. Let's get back to music. What's number 4?
Record number 4 is Beethoven's Fifth. This is largely due to my brother, who was my greatest musical influence and probably the dearest, sweetest person other than my husband that I know. And he gave me this before I left for Mozambique. And I played da-da-da-da throughout the jungle, and my father would scream that it would frighten away the buffalo and the elephants, but I didn't care, and it did.
Kleiber conducting the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra. Prince Michael is an ex-soldier, and like your mother, he won distinction in winter sports. He was British bobsleigh champion. He's also a rally driver and a horseman. How many of these sports interest you?
You could offer me any money and I would not go down a bobsleigh. I think he feels a little bit the same way about hunting, but he does it out of love for me.
But you like horses. You like
I
riding.
like horses, but I'm not very expert. I sort of believe in having a good horse and heading for the biggest fence, because that's the biggest thrill. But I also have the biggest spill as a result.
But he doesn't like the high fences as much as you do.
I don't think he likes horses very much.
And, of course, you have many royal duties. I believe that between you attend something like 300 functions a year.
News to me. I've never counted them up, but I believe you.
Yes.
If you say so, I believe you.
All at your own expense, I believe.
Well, my husband was brought up to believe that you cannot have the privilege without the obligation, and therefore he fulfills what he sees as his obligation, and I, as his wife, follow him.
It must sometimes be hard work. I remember an awards function where you had to stand for about an hour and a half. Nobody provided a chair, and you were giving smiles and cheerful words to all the winners.
I remember that because I was wearing rather uncomfortable shoes. Well, there we are. I mean, there are worse things.
Yes.
It would have been silly to get up and get down every time,
Yes, quite.
Probably easier to stand.
Is there any particular function you remember that really came unstuck?
Too many to mention. Usually when I haven't been told I have to make a speech, and in the middle of lunch I sort of choke on whatever it is I'm eating because I'm making a speech at the end of it, and I have to think about that.
But you usually know what's going to happen.
Oh, yes, it's my own muddle if I don't, I assure you. My office is very, very efficient.
Yes, you get mixed up in silly stunts. There was one where some man dressed up as a wolf and attacked you just to get newspaper publicity. I mean, that kind of irresponsible behaviour can't happen very often.
Yes, but the letters one gets are so delicious that it almost makes it all right. I never forget one particular letter I had after the so-called wolf episode, which was a lovely lady who wrote saying, "Quite honestly, I wouldn't be upset if I were you, because for a married woman of your age to still be attractive to wolves is quite something in itself."
Oh, charming.
Cheered me up no end.
You must have a vast mail,
Yes, we do.
all
And
of
it-
which has to be answered, I suppose.
Yes, it does. Our office is very, very hard-working and under a lot of pressure a lot of the time. Incidents happen that mean more mail, the birth of children, obviously, a sudden religious marriage, the tragic loss of a cat. I had over 2,000 letters when my cat disappeared.
Really? You are a great cat lady. You love cats.
I do. I love cats. I love dogs. I love all animals. Anything on 4 legs with fur on more or less qualifies. I do love cats.
How many do you have at any given moment?
I have 9 at the moment. But only the Oriental 3 travel backwards and forwards to London with me. The Moggies tend to stay put in the country.
I see. Let's have another record.
Record number 5 is a waltz. Now, this is the Gold and Silver Waltz by Leha, with which we opened our wedding ball in Vienna. It's always been said we only had a civil wedding in Vienna. The fact of the matter is that we were always going to have a civil wedding followed by a church wedding, because that is the law in Austria, as in most European countries. And after our civil marriage, that evening we were to have a wedding ball, and the next day our religious marriage. Well, we missed out on the religious marriage, but we still had the ball. And we opened the ball with this waltz, and my husband said, "Waltz?" And I said, "Waltz." And he thought, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and I said, "No, darling, spin at quarter time." And
Wow.
that was the last time that I have said, "Follow me, I shall lead," because he's never let me do it again. And he's never quite got over the dizzying speed of it, but it started our adventure into our own life, so I'd like to remember that.
Orchestra. Do you still find time to do some designing?
Yes and no. I do a certain amount of consulting still, which means being bossy and giving my opinions and what I like and don't like. Not as much as I'd like. I'm a trustee of the Victoria and Albert Museum,
Yes.
and that gives me at least a little bit of time to look at beautiful things. And the best part of being a trustee is that you're allowed to touch things. All museums say, "Please do not touch."
Yes.
And I can touch things, and nobody can say a thing to me.
You have a country house. Of course, you worked on the interior of that.
Yes,
It's an old house.
it's a very old house indeed. It's very old in that it's full of woodworm and crumbling and full of rot.
Do you paint?
I do paint. I painted a lot more before I married. I seem to have a lot more time for the children, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But during the month of January, when the ground is too frozen to hunt and there's very little else happening, I paint. January is my painting month,
Yeah.
and the light is rather beautiful.
You mentioned your children. You have 2. You have Lord Frederick Windsor. How old is he?
He's 4, and then I have my little Gabriella, who we
Yes.
call Ella, and she's 2. They're both April babies, although he's Aries and she's Taurus.
And you're Capricorn.
Well, I'm going to have trouble with my Taurus daughter, I'm told, but she's such a good little girl at this stage. I think not. She's the image, incidentally, of my mother-in-law
Is she?
at this age, as my sister-in-law tells me anyway. So I have hopes of a great beauty in the family.
We got to record number 6.
We got to record number 6, which is still in Vienna, because Vienna taught me to love opera. I had a very small apartment around the corner from the opera house in the equivalent of what is Covent Garden in Vienna. It was over the flower market, so every morning I woke to the sounds of the flower sellers and the smell of the flowers. And I didn't have television, and I didn't have any other form of entertainment. And so when I was spare in the evening, which was quite often, I popped around the corner to the opera house, where the tickets were very, very cheap, and I could walk there in the snow sometimes. So this is an aria from Tosca, not because Tosca is necessarily my favorite opera, but it's one of my favorites. I think we've got Di Stefano
Yes.
singing the aria. And Tosca is such a powerful love story. And as a very typical Central European, I like a good tragedy.
Is Tosca, sung by Giuseppe Di Stefano. I don't know how you find time for all this, ma'am, but you're also writing a book. You're busy on an historical biography.
Yes, busy is at the moment not really the word. I started 2.5 years ago working on a biography of Elizabeth Stuart, better known as the Winter Queen. Largely because I've always been fascinated by her, an English princess who became Queen of Bohemia, and there was I, a Bohemian, who became an English princess. And also because once I started reading about her, I really became fascinated by her and was somewhat affronted that so many people didn't know that she was English, that they confused her with Elizabeth, Empress of Austria,
Yes.
and that she actually started, in effect, the 30 Years' War. I'm afraid at the speed that my book is progressing, it's going to be my own little private 30 Years' War, and that it's going to take me 30 years to complete. So that I'm being a little slow.
You've been researching in Heidelberg.
I've done all the research in Prague, Heidelberg, and The Hague, and I've started the writing, but I find just organizing my papers takes me hours, you know, and then the kittens come in and spill everything, and the children come in and mess everything up again.
We look forward to that book. Let's have record number
You'll
7.
be waiting a very long time for that book. Record number 7 is by Mahler, another Bohemian. And I love a great deal of his music, but this is number 5 in C-sharp minor, the fourth movement, the Adagietto, which was chosen for a very beautiful film about Venice. This particular theme recurs again and again. And Venice has been a favorite bolt hole of my husband and mine. We were not actually there on our honeymoon. We were in India and in Iran. But we very soon afterwards went to Venice, and we go there as often as we can. And so this will remind me of our very happy times in Venice.
George Sheltie conducting the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. How resourceful would you be on a desert island? Could you build a hut?
Oh, yes.
Have you done any fishing?
Yes.
Well, that's
I've had a
useful.
little fishing on the wire, little salmon fishing. I don't know that I should have that sort of facility on this desert island, but I think I would fish quite well.
You know the principles of it. And you can cultivate, obviously.
I'm a farmer's daughter.
Sailing. Could you construct some kind of a craft, a raft or whatever?
No, we're getting into very dangerous water here. Having launched Britain's challenge for the America's Cup, I really ought to say yes, 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 I can say that. My husband assures me that I turn green in the bath because I'm seasick. I'm seasick looking at the water. I'm seasick thinking about the water. No, I'm going to stick on this island. I'm not going to venture forth.
We'll do our very best to get you rescued very quickly. Your
I'm very
eight-
happy on this island. I don't mind a bit if you leave me there for a while.
Your last record, the last of the 8.
Now, my last of the 8, I've come to Mozart, largely because I think all 8 could have been Mozart. I've chosen the violin concerto, better known as K216 in G, with Karajan conducting. Karajan is a friend and someone I admire very much. And this is one of his young protégés playing Anne-Sophie Mutter. This happened to get stuck in our tape deck at our house in the country, and for about a month we heard nothing else but this tape. So I shall be reminded of our beautiful house, and never, of course, forget our children, but I shall be reminded of the horses, the goats, the dogs, the cats, and all the sundry animals, the Cotswolds, hunting, and the very private part of our lives.
G major, the Berlin Philharmonic Orchestra conducted by Herbert von Karajan and the soloist Anne-Sophie Mutter. If you could take only one disc of the 8 you've chosen, which would it be?
Well, I think that last one, the Mozart, with all the fond memories of my home and my happy family.
You're allowed one luxury, any one object of no practical use whatever, that will give you pleasure on the island.
Now, I'm going to insist on this. I want to take a cat. And it's got to
No.
be oriental, and it's preferably pregnant.
I'm sorry, we... Oh, here is conflict. No, it must be inanimate. If we
Well,
let
it's
you have
luxury,
a
it's
cat...
luxury. It's a total luxury. You've no idea what they cost me. They shred my carpets. They shred my curtains.
No.
My furniture is absolutely in pieces. This is a luxury of a limit that you cannot imagine.
I would give you anything you want except a cat. It must be something inanimate. A statue of a cat, a sculptured cat.
You don't understand.
jade cat.
You don't understand. There's method in my madness. This cat is not only going to be pregnant, but an oriental cat is one hell of a hunter. And they bring me little presents on the end of my bed, and they're going to bring me little rabbits out of this desert island.
I'm afraid we shall have to discuss this at some length afterwards. You have no luxury at the moment, but you do have one book, apart from the Bible and the complete works of Shakespeare, which are
No, I
already
know
there.
I've made you very unhappy about
No,
my
you
cat.
haven't made me unhappy. This is just...
I'm having a cat. Now, you didn't notice that I had a little cat in my pocket when I was rescued and landed on this desert island. You
I-
didn't see
I
it. You
heard
didn't
it
notice it.
distinctly.
No, it was very quiet. It was very small. My book.
Yes.
When my children go to boarding school, which happens at an unhealthy early age, I think, in England, it's very difficult for a European girl to let her children go to boarding school quite so young. However, when they do, and I'm suddenly left without any noise and clamour in my life, I'm going to go to university and take a degree in history. And therefore, it has to be a history book. I might as well get ready on this desert island for this time. So when I thought about all the history books that I could take, it had to be one that I could read again and again and again. So at the risk of sounding very erudite, I'm going to ask for the histories of Herodotus.
Yeah.
Because I can read him again and again. he likes details. He likes lots of frivolous details. While he's describing a battle, he will tell you about the colour of the shields and the way they do their hair and how they tied up their boots and all these sort of delicious little details, which I absolutely love and which waste so much of my time when I'm trying to write my own history.
All right. You shall have the histories of Herodotus and give you all the facility for writing another book when you come back. And thank you, Your Royal Highness, for letting us hear your Desert Island Discs.
Thank you very much.
Goodbye, everyone.